These are Middle Paleolithic tools made out of flint 300,000 years ago. It's just mind-boggling, the depth of time that we study here.
I'm Gavin Freeborn, and this is Original Ideas, a podcast from the University of Liverpool. Across the series, we explore the world of academic research, the impact it has on society, and how it can shape our future. Today, we look through the lens of the past as we uncover the work of academic research in archaeology.
500,000 years ago, in northern Zambia, at a place called Kalambo Falls, people were living by a river. They've made a structure of wood, which is the earliest evidence we have in the world.
The University of Liverpool's Department of Archaeology, Classics and Egyptology recently celebrated its 120th birthday and has been behind some fascinating stories in the last few years. From discovering the world's oldest wooden structure to exploring the link between Ice Age and modern-day teenagers, new research is unlocking secrets from the past all the time. But what does it do for us going forward? What value can archaeology bring to us? And how can it help society? I caught up with 3 archaeological research experts to find out. Thanks for joining me in the studio, Professor Larry Barham, Rachel Stokes and Dr. Ceren Kabukcu. First of all, if we could just get a brief overview of your background and research areas. Larry, start with you.
I am Professor of African Archaeology here at the University of Liverpool. My training and PhD was in anthropology in the US, of which archaeology is a small part, but it informs how I think about the past as well. So it's part of me. The living is my route into the long gone.
Excellent. Rachel, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
My PhD research focuses on human-climate relationships in the past. So I'm particularly interested in how we were adapting to different climates and climatic sort of upheaval and variability. And I look at that through climate niche modelling.
Excellent. And Ceren?
Hi, I'm an archaeobotanist, so I study plant remains and residues left by plant use at archaeological sites. And I work predominantly in Southwest Asia, so places like northern Iraq, Turkey, and parts of the Eastern Mediterranean like Greece. And a long-ish time span, although if you compare me to Larry, it's not going to be that long, from the sort of late Middle Paleolithic to the Chalcolithics, about 75,000 to about 5,000 years ago.
Excellent. And I think that brings us to archaeology at Liverpool, 120 years of archaeology at Liverpool. What are we doing these days in terms of technology that's different? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the technology that was used to analyse this old wood.
We have a team of people here. Archaeology is very interdisciplinary. The old days of the lone individual, Indiana Jones, braving snakes, etc. That's long gone. If it ever was quite like that. So we rely on teams of people who bring different expertise to help us analyse parts of the archaeological record, which no individual can do on their own. So here at Liverpool, we have capacity to do experimental archaeology. We have a really fabulous ancient technologies workshop. We have expertise with people who can make stone tools, they can use stone tools, they can use other kinds of tools made from other materials, and basically working with wood, bone, animals, etc. We also have a really keen group of photographers who, photography sounds really basic, but it isn't. We can do 3D modeling of the wood. We also have, I think, a particular niche expertise in this department through, I've got to mention a name, J.R. Peterson, and he's great. And he brought something called reflectance transformation imaging to the project, which allows us to look at just the surfaces of the wood, seeing things that are not visible to the naked eye. And in doing so, it's just opened up to our understanding of the past through the detail, the intensity of the work that was done 500,000 years ago. And it allowed us to interpret this and bring to the world, effectively, a different interpretation of the past in which these early humans were much more sophisticated in their knowledge of the environment and their stone tool technology, but also cooperating together to create something which was, in a sense, lasting. These are big things. They're working on trees. And we hadn't expected that, the capacity of that early. Anything that's a major achievement, we tend to be biased, like, oh, that's us, Homo sapiens, we did all of that. Early humans, primitive, it took us, it took language, blah, 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 blah. Throughout my career, I've had to kind of push back against that, because I think it's the wrong starting point for looking at the past, judging it against us. Take it at its own place, its own time, and look at what's being achieved at that place and that time. Liverpool's really been important in terms of that, taking that approach and maximising it.
Yeah, excellent. And it sounds like the teamwork is really key. And then the application of technology and the work that JR did with this particular technology. And talking about technology, we talk a lot about the progress of developments such as artificial intelligence. Why is archaeology just as important, and what benefit can it bring to us in today's society and going forward?
I think understanding the broad perspective of humanity and where we came from really structures how we think about the world. So for a long time, the narrative of evolution was that it was very competition driven. And now we're starting to appreciate more how cooperation has really led to all the human diversity that we have and the different ways of life that we have. And I think it underlies how we structure our societies and our economies. If we have this perception that there's always going to be competition, there are always going to be people who lack the basic essentials, and that's just how we are. Reframing that and understanding how important cooperation is for us, I think will change how we view the world and how we view our futures and the different possible futures that we can have.
Yeah. Just jump in here with Charles Darwin, 1873. We tend to think of Darwin as the root of this kind of competitive advantage and nature red in tooth and claw, but he said the society in which people cooperate and look after each other, have a sense of coherence, they have an advantage over those societies which are selfish and incoherent and kind of splitting apart as everybody looks after themselves individually. So I think, in a sense, we've come back to Darwin, or we've forgotten about him. We're starting to look more closely at how we make the cooperation work. How do we transmit that to the next generation? So social learning is changed how archaeologists look at the past. So rather than we're looking at stone tools, yes, but some of them are so complex in the making. They must have been learned by somebody, taught by somebody. And that's the essence of a group coming together. So those who are older with expertise teach the younger, and they carry on the tradition to the next generation and so on. So that's how our thinking, those around us, are looking at the past. It's not just the object, but the people behind the object. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the modern sort of take is survival of the fittest, as you say, from Darwin, and, competition. And it's quite interesting in, common speech. If someone does something that's maybe perceived to be not very intelligent, people might say, oh, you're a Neanderthal. And actually, from what I've heard and read, Neanderthals were actually very intelligent and socially very cohesive. And it's quite interesting, obviously, Homo sapien won out. However, it might be interesting to know exactly how Homo sapien won out.
Yeah, Ceren's worked with Neanderthals.
So I work on a specific site that has Neanderthal occupation wall, or at least presence as evidence, and then the later initial Upper Paleolithic occupation that is most likely associated with Homo sapiens' presence in the region. The site is Shanidar Cave, and it's in the northern Zagros. And it's quite well known because it was one of those original sites excavated by Ralph Selecki back in the day. And they had argued, with evidence they found at the time, that there was a flower placement at the burial sites of the Neanderthals, etc. And that has been questioned multiple times on multiple angles. Luckily for me, I don't work on the micro remains for that site. I work on the macro remains, and one of the bits of evidence we've managed to find and published in the last few years is evidence for cooking with specifically with things like wild vetches, peas, and lentils. And it looks like at the moment that it's very similar between the Neanderthal occupation and what would be potentially the Homo sapiens occupation. So the way they use their resources so far, it looks quite similar. The way they prepare them to consume looks very similar. That actually looks similar to many of the later hunter-gatherer sites in the region, stretching all the way to the end of the Epipaleolithic. So that's a 50,000-year sort of record of culinary tradition that seems to be shared from the Neanderthals to whatever you want to call the later hunter-gatherers in that region. So it almost looks like, in terms of whatever genomic differences, they might be separated, but culturally they are very connected, and they're potentially communicating with one another. They are sharing the know-how and the technology. And this is not necessarily surprising because they share other kinds of technology. It's just the way they live is also appearing to be quite similar. And this is the beauty, going back to what archaeology can offer, of we can offer you stories of snapshots from the past that show us how we perceive the past can be reshaped and should be reshaped for us to question our present and future. This is one of the distinct advantages. And occasionally, you know, archaeologists, we might be in the humanities, but we also innovate on methodology because we deal with difficult materials, poor states of preservation, really fragmentary evidence to be able to create a scaffold to take us to the interpretation. So if you look at the development of things like radiocarbon dating, environmental DNA or sedimentary DNA, the questions and the samples that archaeology provides have been crucial in their development. So sure, we might be under an umbrella that is not considered sciences, but we have humanities and sciences within our discipline. And we're quite happy to talk to each other, no? This is one of the unique aspects of archaeology, where we're happy to exchange information, exchange expertise. I mean, I give you the example of Kalambo Falls one more time. Larry was quite happy to invite me on to actually share what I can see, even though I don't work on African archaeology. I've never worked on something so early in my life. I had been wanting to do various bits of experiments and doing this for cooking, but, you know, I didn't really have the experience. And it just developed into something that was very collaborative and with lots of different people.
You all clearly have a love of the subject and a passion for it, which is great. You know, where does that come from and what brought you into archaeology?
I don't know where it comes from. So when I was 5, I was picking up rocks. I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I saw the training they had to go through. I said, no, I get sick in the back of the car. That's not going to happen. Collecting rocks, I started finding artifacts, and I realized there were humans behind this, and where we lived, there was a museum nearby, and they had displays of Native American life. They had a canoe on the ceiling made of birch bark. That just took my breath. And there were these little dioramas of campsites and canoes and things like that. I mean, today, you know, that would not get any kid's attention. But for me, I was just riveted. I put my face to the glass and just, oh, look, they're doing this, this, and this. I think there's something like a genetic nerdiness that unites us all because we just love the subject in detail. And that's what you really need to do in order to, enjoy this, because it is sometimes mind-numbing. But from my PhD, I looked at 500,000 tiny fragments of broken quartz. That's tedious. But patterns emerge from that. And I think that's kind of the moment of discovery when you start to see things coming out of the data that perhaps nobody else has seen before. Probably it's something we all share. And all the people I work with, you know, in this interdisciplinary world here, they all want to know about the past. They are desperate to address questions and how to improve our knowledge, the dating, for example, the analysis of the wood, all of those things. Everybody's sort of pulling in the same direction.
A lot of quartz and a lot of teamwork.
Yes.
And I share that enthusiasm definitely when I go to a museum. And let's hope that more children's minds light up when they see these things. Ceren, yourself, what was it that attracted you to archaeology?
Right. So when I started my undergrad, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I kind of wanted it to be that way because I'd left Turkey from a very sort of strict education system where you're asked to have a long-term plan and a career plan by the time you start high school. And I just sort of wanted to see the world, go different places, meet different people. And I got into archaeology the first time I took an elective course in cultural anthropology. So it was kind of a sideways way of coming into this world of saying, actually, there's a lot of diversity in the past and in the present, and maybe this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So it wasn't necessarily something I had a sort of childhood dream to do, but it was a discipline that felt like it's welcoming and you could make it your own and meet lots of different people.
Excellent. And yourself, Rachel?
I would say I've always had a general interest in like how did society get to the way it is now. That sort of led me to archaeology, and then that led me more to the human evolution side of things. And I've got, just as a theme, a very general interest in like how really broad-scale processes articulate with small-scale processes. for example, how climate is influenced by orbital forcing, and then climate influences human demographics, and then that influences how we transmit social information on like large scales between societies and on small scales between, like the example Larry gave earlier of like a grandparent teaching a kid, and all these kind of, some of them are nested, some of them just interlinked in different ways, and archaeology and anthropology is kind of perfect for looking at that kind of thing.
If your idea of science is black and white answers, this is not the place to go. Archaeology is full of grey and lots of questions which we know we can never answer really fully, but we try to do the best we can and persuade colleagues this is the kind of the working idea and challenge it. That's how it goes. We're not saying this is it, end of story. Story never ends.
The never-ending story.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you very much. So let's say you could choose one. What has been your proudest Liverpool research achievement so far?
The obvious answer would be the work at Kalambo Falls, but I'm not going to say that. As fabulous as that's been, it's not something I really expected to find in the way we found that. What I'm proudest of is a project which is just now coming to an end with the British Museum. It's called the Endangered Material Knowledge Programme. It's a bit of archaeology and anthropology, working in northern Zambia, seeing in a museum there, cloth that was made from bark. And I was looking at the museum, I thought, how did they make that? What kind of tools did they use? And an opportunity came from the British Museum in this funding for disappearing knowledge to go and work with the last 3 craftsmen. They are men who make bark cloth today for clothes. One of the 3 is now sadly dead. But we recorded, there's audio-visual recording in the field, and that's a legacy for the communities, because when these 3 go, nobody's taking this up. So it's a piece of their traditional life when everything was made from local natural materials that's now there for future generations in those communities, and also for, on a global scale, if you want to see and understand how these things were made, what value they had to those who made them, because they're used in rituals, that's there. But it was just something I jumped on. I thought, here's an opportunity. Worked with colleagues in Zambia, and they thought, yeah, let's do this. And it's done.
Yeah. Thank you. And yourself, Ceren?
Right, so this is a tough one. I don't, like Larry, I don't want to give an example of something I've done and published to see, because once, I guess in academia, most of the time when you've finished up or wrapped up a piece of research and it's published and it's out there, it has a life of its own, and I can no longer really be proud of it or be attached to it because it's not part of me anymore. It's part of public knowledge. But there are some things that I've done up to today that I'm particularly proud of. One of these is the time, effort, and bit of funding getting that I've done to build up sampling systems to recover soil samples to be processed for botanical remains. Because if these things are not sampled while the excavation is ongoing and they're not processed almost soon thereafter, if not necessarily immediately, they're lost forever. There will be nothing to study in the future. And even if I don't study them, there's a number of sites, like I think about more than 10 by now, where I've built bespoke systems where we use water recycling to be able to process these things. And until I got involved in those sites and many others, nothing was being sampled. And for me, that was the biggest pain. When you see material that has potential to be studied in the future, if not by me, then by somebody else, and it's gone forever, I drop everything else and I say, okay, I'm going to go talk to an ironsmith and we are going to make something for you guys to use. And that kind of thing that I know a lot of archaeologists do is my little contribution to it is my proudest moment, because at least they will be around to be studied in 50 years' time. And the sad reality, and I know many others experience in other parts of the world, is places like southern Turkey, preservation is actually diminishing with increasing aridity. So if we don't sample things now, there will be nothing for us to go back and sample, even if we reopen some of these sites.
Yeah, exactly. And Turkey being a very fascinating and important area of the world.
Has its moments.
Yes. And I suppose we often talk about saving the future, but you're saving the past.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, at least to look after the materials we feel we have a responsibility towards is something to be proud of. Is not individual publications or yeah.
Definitely. And yourself, Rachel?
Well, I'm very early in my career, so Larry didn't talk about the Deep Roots project, so I will. I guess all the work I've done for the Deep Roots project, and not just the season at Colombo, but the one before that was around the Victoria Falls region. And I like the really collaborative element of the project because we have colleagues from the Livingstone Museum, Moto Museum, Zambia National Heritage, and from the University of Zambia in Lusaka as well. Yeah, just all the work we've done on that project. My involvement has been largely fieldwork, but I love fieldwork.
How was that moment when you found the old wood?
I mean, we didn't really know exactly what it was. The wood stands in such contrast to all the sediment around it, which is kind of pale sand, sort of beige. And then you get this big black kind of solid piece of wood. That was very, strange. But we didn't, because we hadn't done all the analysis, we didn't really know what it was. So I wouldn't pretend that we were all standing on the banks of the river going, oh my God, look what we found, you know?
Yeah, it's a journey of exploration, really, isn't it? And I suppose you don't want to jump to conclusions. And who jumps to the conclusion that you found a wooden structure that was crafted by hand around 470 odd thousand years ago?
Just right,
say 500.
Just say 500.
Say 500.
The dating is very conservative.
But for you guys, it was a lot of work and planning, no? To be able to get those things out? And
The reality is we didn't expect to find any wood, so we weren't really prepared. In one of those moments where, everything's changing. This is really important. Let's find buckets to put water in, put wood in, and crates and things, keep everything. Yeah.
God, it must have been insane.
It was.
And she just looks like really calm. This is normal.
Just another day at work.
I didn't have to sort out the export permits. I think that's probably the stressful part. I was just digging.
It's one of many. Yeah.
And great to hear about your collaborators and the partnerships and the university out there as well. Very, very important. I imagine that working with other people in the common interest is huge in your work. What do you need in terms of facilities or networks and partnerships to deliver your research?
I'll take the question as, how do I go about putting a network together? And this is going to sound very kind of unscientific, but I choose people who I like and who I want to work with and know I can work with. I try to avoid people who are going to be difficult, because if you're working as a team, you need to pull together as a team. And if there's an outlier who's making life difficult, that becomes an issue. So it's meeting people informally at conferences. That COVID kind of knocked that sideways because it meant we were all online. But it's what happens away from the lecture at the conference. It's in the evenings, and have a few drinks. Everything's much more relaxed, and you can get to know somebody a bit and say, yeah, I can work with that person. And especially if they're offering a different expertise, which is complementary, then you start to build a team. But I also have a long-standing working relationship with a geographer at the University of Aberystwyth, Jeff Duller. He's trained in physics. And Jeff and I have this kind of joking relationship. I always keep pushing him harder to get me older dates on things when he comes up with it. And so I said, Jeff, can you just try that again? We've been working together for almost 20 years. And it's fun. He's very cool and calm under stress. He knows how to jumpstart a car, rolling it down a hill towards the cliff of the falls. I mean, that was impressive, Jeff, because we picked up somebody who needed to go to the hospital to deliver a baby. It all happened, but he's somebody I felt comfortable with. He brings people I feel comfortable with, and it expands like that. So I say this, maybe all science works like this. I don't know, but this is just a personal experience. So Ceren and Rachel are two people who I'm very happy to be with. They're great.
Yeah, so it's a mixture really of shared vision and goals and objectives, and obviously skills, but also following your senses.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be easy to look at who's leading in a field in a particular area and say, well, how that person? Well, that's the skill and expertise, but I want the person as well, because to me that's more important.
You're going back to cooperation over competition.
We're going back to Darwin. Yeah.
I was about to say exactly the same, and really sort of a lot of people in the modern day looking back at the past or looking back at Neanderthals, it's the ego that looks at others, whether they're others in the world around us today, who may be in the next village or the next town or the next city, Liverpool versus Manchester in the football, or of course, country. Yeah, that cooperation is really, really key. So following on from Larry explaining about the partnerships and the networks and how he builds things. Ceren, can you tell us about what facilities are needed?
I mean, I guess the sky is the limit. You could need all the facilities you could dream of. But my experience at Liverpool, because I did my PhD here and then a few of my previous postdocs, and I've always felt, and I suspect this is a similar feeling, that whatever you want to develop as a sort of new line of research or new question you want to ask over materials, you could conceivably develop that in Liverpool with support from people who are not necessarily even in your department. So when I wanted to explore aspects of doing plant isotope research, I was invited to go and use the Liverpool Isotope facility just across campus. And it was a completely different experience to some of my colleagues who were doing similar research elsewhere, where they pack up their individual specimens and send it off to the NERC facility. No problem with the NERC facility, by the way, but it just goes somewhere to be analysed and the results come to you in 6 months. Whereas here I could be very involved in the process and learn from that experience. And that just little example shows you what is actually unique about our experience of archaeology in Liverpool. We're able to develop things within the department, but also across various faculties and departments. People are quite often very willing to listen and let us try out a few things in pilot stages without necessarily wanting huge budgets. And we can get things off the ground that way.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, it's been wonderful to meet you all, and thank you so much for letting us know about your fascinating research.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having us.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Original Ideas, exploring the world of archaeology and academic research, and looking at how the knowledge of the past can help us in the future. Thank you again to Professor Larry Barham, Rachel Stokes and Dr. Ceren Kabukcu from the University of Liverpool for joining me to talk through this topic. If you've enjoyed listening, please do check out some of the other episodes. We've looked at how academic research is shaping clean air.
The levels in the playground were maybe 20 times the guideline levels for health. Levels in the kitchen were sky high, 100 times higher.
Explored children's rights.
Their rights have been even more diminished in the last couple of years.
And we've joined the fight against dementia.
There's 14 risk factors that have been identified that might cause or lead to or are associated with developing dementia.
Please do listen when you can and head to liverpool.ac.uk/research, where you can also sign up to our monthly research newsletter with updates on events, opportunities to work with us and much more. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again soon.